This video discusses Ilford HP5+, a black and white 400 ISO film, and looks at how to use it, the film's characteristics, the technical details, and the sample images. Lots and lots of sample images. HP5+ is a fast film available in any format you could shoot. Readily year-round, it's available in 35mm in 24 and 36 exposure cassettes, as well as 100-foot bulk lengths. Also in 120, 4x5, 5x7, 8x10, and 11x14. Then once a year during Ilford's ultra-large format event, it's also made available in all of the ULF formats, which are things like 4x10, 6.5x5.5, and other oddball sizes like that, as well as in bulk spools of 40mm width, which can be used to respool onto 127 film spools. This section looks at my perception of different film characteristics. I'll discuss how I see the film's grain, tonal range, acutance, contrast, sharpness, gamma, and then I'll provide some added notes, suggested good uses, and thoughts on how to best digitize this film. For grain, it's dependent on format and developer more than any other film that I've used, and as we'll talk throughout this video, the results in terms of grain are consistent across formats and the type of developer you use over time. So if you use a specific developer and format today, and then come back and do the exact same thing in 18 months or 5 years, it's gonna look the same. The results will be predictable. There are times when the wrong developer will make HP5+ look like it was left in a car's trunk in the desert for a decade. And then there are times when the right developer will make HP5 look like a super clean digital image. Often and typically HP5+ is somewhere in between those. HP5+ responds to lighting and developing with a huge array of potential image characteristics, and grain is the most noticeable of those characteristics. That makes this an amazingly versatile film with a great range of potential uses. For tonality and tonal range, like grain, these are largely dependent on format and chemistry. Developed well, HP5+ is some of the most dynamic film I've used. Developed poorly, it's far from dynamic with almost no shadow or highlight detail. So if you have good developing technique and practices, you're going to be able to get a whole lot out of your HP5 negatives. For acutance, the images here make it look like HP5+ has lower acutance levels than comparable 400 ISO films, but that contributes to the characteristic HP5+ look and gives images from this film a generally pleasing image aesthetic. For contrast, as I've noted already, chemistry and format affect that substantially, but pushing and pulling also will affect contrast on HP5+. So as you watch this video and look at sample images online, try to find out the rated ISO, the developing chemistry, and time. And those things will let you know how to replicate those results, because like I've said, results on this are pretty easily replicable across time with the same variables. For sharpness, it's good. Image detail is good, and fine details like animal fur, cacti needles, and so forth reproduce well regardless of format. For dynamic range, which is also called gamma, if developed well and in the right chemistry, dynamic range on HP5+ can be amazing. When we look at the characteristic curve, we're going to see why that is. This beautifully long, gradual, flat characteristic curve that could realistically just go on forever. And some of the images in this video should show you what that looks like with a nice, broad tonal spectrum and lots of shadow and highlight detail. For some additional notes, I've prefaced a number of the criteria in this section with the phrase, dependent on chemistry. HP5+ is fabulously versatile, incredibly tough, and very usable. It can be pushed and pulled to a very decent extent. However, It is less resilient to poor developing practices than many other stocks I've tried. Also, not all developers are great for it. The ones that are great can produce really superb results. Most developers that I used are in the fair to middling range and not that exciting, and a handful should not be used for any reason at all. Later in the video, we'll talk about the specific great ones that I really liked and the specific poor ones that you should not use with this film, period. Some great uses for HP5+, well, there's a lot. This film can do a lot. Portraits and landscapes, I think, are my favorite uses for this film. Wildlife is an exceptional use. Street and urban photography, sports, documentary work, and in theory, astrophotography, though amazingly, I didn't try astrophotography with this film, and I do a lot of that. I don't know how, that was a huge oversight on my part. But at any rate, astrophotography and star trails should be good uses for this. For digital conversion, HP5+ converted very well to digital with my DSLR digitization technique. The negatives held a great deal of data on their own, and editing the negatives from raw files created from them helped bring out a whole lot in them. If you have a scanner that can scan raw files, which I just learned this week is a thing, or if you can get ultra high resolution TIFFs out of a scanner, that's going to give you the most editing leeway with your negatives. If your scanner only scans to JPEG, even if it's a high res JPEG, you're better off taking the scanner and donating it to somebody and getting a DSLR digitization setup going, because it's going to give you better results for basically the same amount of money and far less time. All right, let's take a look at the spectral sensitivity curve. This is straight out of the data sheet, literally control print screen, did a minor edit in Photoshop, and here's what we've got. To read this, I think that a good way of thinking about this is if you had a straight line right across the middle from the left to the right side, and you had an array of colors that were all of equal luminosity, your negative would be gray, just flat gray. So you want to have some variation within light sensitivity to get the most out of the tonal range of your film. Now let's see the color. We're going to overlay the color spectrum here. And what you can see is that the red drop off on HP5+ is notable and dramatic. One thing this is going to tell you right out of the gate is that red filters aren't going to do a whole lot for your images, because there's not that much of this film sensitivity that's in the red spectrum. It will give you very high contrast images, very, 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 very high contrast, because steep lines here correlate with contrast. But it's also going to rob you of your dynamic range, and should, though admittedly I did not try a red filter on this because this spectral sensitivity curve does not lend itself well to that, but it should also mean that you would need to compensate with some additional light if you use a red filter. I did use other colors of filter, green, yellow, and orange. Maybe blue, I forget if I ever tried blue. Orange filters I found really did nicely. In fact, pause here, this is a photo I took on the anniversary graphic with a gradient orange filter with the orange filter over the sky. And you can see how dramatically the orange filter in this photo made the clouds pop out of the sky. You'll notice now, going back to the spectral sensitivity curve, that the highest point is between bright yellow and yellow orange. And the way I read these curves is that if you have that cyan and that yellow, if you look at this curve, that yellow is higher on this curve. So if you had a block of cyan next to a block of yellow and they were the same luminosity, on your negative, that yellow would reproduce to a positive as a brighter tone. And that's because the film emulsion is more sensitive to that color of light, and so it takes fewer photons for that color range to get up to density on the negative. So a couple of noteworthy things here: you get a drop off in the blue down to the purples, and you get another one in the green yellow. And those are two really interesting things. The drop off in the blue we're going to start with, and that means that your skies are going to be biased to very slightly dark. Skies are a blue to cyan. If you're You've seen the photos in this video. A lot of the clouds just kind of stand out. There's no filtering going on with most of those. And that's because the skies are just a little bit darker of a gray color, which makes the clouds visible. The second one is the green to green yellow. And that little dip there is going to give your green foliage a slightly darker tone. That bears out in a lot of my wildlife and nature shots in this video, where the grass and the trees are a slightly darker gray than they are in other black and white films. Personally, that's a look that I really like. Now, I'm going to show you another photo here of a cactus. And if you'll notice, the cactus needles, which on this variety of cactus are yellow, are bright white. Well, they're brighter than the cactus. And the cactus, which is green, is much darker. There's two reasons for that. One of those, going back to the spectral sensitivity curve, is the difference in sensitivity to those spectra of light. The other one is that the sun was behind the cacti up and to the right. And so the spectral sensitivity of this film, combined with the lighting, really amplified that effect. So here's a characteristic curve, again, literally control print screened from the datasheet. The datasheet notes that this is based on a 6-minute 30-second development in Ilfotec HC with a concentration of 1 part HC to 31 parts water. That's what HC plus 31 means, at 20 degrees Celsius, which is 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Next thing we're going to look at is the different parts of it. The base over on the left, which is robin's egg blue, seafoam green, something in that range color-wise. That is the baseline density of the negative. So if you were to take the film, instead of putting it through your camera, just develop it, that base, and if you were to draw that all the way over to the right, you could see the relative density compared to the other parts of the negative. That base is the film with no image data. After the base, where the film starts to curve up, and I forgot to mark this on the file here, is the inertia point. The inertia point is the part, the point at which the film starts to record an image. So this is relatively early on. If you look at this and there are 9 columns, that inertia point is early on in the second. What that means is that relatively, actually very early into the exposure, the film is going to start developing image data. Now your toe density, that's your areas that have relatively little to no, very little image data. We'll leave it at that. Those are your shadow areas. So with your negative, if you hold it up to the light, if you look at the negatives on the right, let's take a look at the image on the bottom. Underneath the trees, there's a couple of shadows and some dark parts in the car. In the negative, those parts of the film are much clearer, and those are in the toe of the negative, where there's less density. Less density in negative equals darker tones in positive. And then going up from there, we have this absolutely beautiful, like a 32-degree angle, give or take, straight line gamma section. That tells us that across the image exposure time and across the different densities, you're going to have a nice, even exposure. Shallower lines mean flatter images. Steeper lines mean more contrasty images. This is a very nice low contrast gamma line. If you handle HP5 right, then you're going to get tons and tons of shadow detail and tons of highlight detail. A couple of noteworthy things not included on this chart. There's no shoulder, which is where the highlights start to blow out. And there's no Dmax, which is the maximum amount of density where there's zero highlight data left at all. I couldn't tell you exactly where those would fall if this were to be drawn out the rest of the way, but what I can tell you is that if you handle HP5+, you're going to get tonal range out the wazoo. Here's the reciprocity failure chart. HP5+ needs no reciprocity correction from as fast as 1/10,000th of a second for the fastest shutter speed, down to as slow as a half a second. Beyond a half a second, you do need to correct for reciprocity. Same thing if you have a Minolta Alpha 9 and you're shooting at 1/12,000th of a second. That's the one camera in the world where this faster than 1/10,000th of a second matters. If you are shooting at 1/12,000th of a second, then you're going to need to add something like a third to a half of a stop with the aperture. Development compensation with this film does not appear to be necessary if you exposure compensate correctly. Let's read the reciprocity chart here, and let's read it together. Along the bottom is your metered time. So what this is telling you is that the time along the bottom is how long your light meter, whether it's in your camera or handheld, tells you that your exposure needs to be in seconds. That's not a 30th of a second on the right side on the bottom, that's 30 seconds. Along the vertical axis, that's your adjusted time. And what that means is that that's the amount of time you actually need to have your image be. And that dark line that curves upward is your correct exposure line. So let's say that you're taking a picture and your camera tells you that you need to shoot an exposure for 10 seconds. If you actually do that, you're going to be very underexposed. What you would need to do is go over to the 10 and then follow it up until you hit that thick black line, and then follow it to the right until you get to the time. So a metered exposure of 10 seconds means that you need to have an actual exposure of, looks like it's around 30 seconds. So if you had a metered exposure of 10 seconds and you took the photo for 125 seconds, everything above that thick black line is going to be overexposed. So the further you are above the black line, the more overexposed your images are going to be. Everything under that black line is underexposed, and the more under it you are, the more underexposed your images are going to be. The Ilford datasheet indicates that HP5 Plus can produce good results to 3200 ISO. No low-end ISO is provided in the datasheet for pulling the film, but my experiments at 50 ISO indicate that the film can be used to that level in a manner that can yield results that will be usable for some settings, though they are very, very low in contrast. The massive development chart has data from 25 to 12,800 ISO, and honestly, both of those extremes strike me as absolutely bonkers with a low probability of yielding usable results. I found that HP5 Plus worked very well with the right developer from 400 to 1600 ISO. If I want to use a slower film, I'm just going to buy a slower film. I would be willing to give HP5 Plus a go at 3200 ISO, but I'm not sure that I would use it personally beyond that. For HP5 Plus, my recommended rating, which is the same thing as ISO, is 400 for most situations, 800 to 1600 to freeze motion, or for use in low light, or for specific effects. Pulling HP5 Plus tended to reduce contrast unpleasantly, while pushing it could erase shadow tones. Set yourself and your film up for success and try to use HP5 Plus in the optimum range because it can provide incredible results in that range. HP5 Plus isn't going to benefit from strong filters in any meaningful way. And what I mean by that is slapping a yellow or orange filter on HP5 Plus will give you probably more contrast than you're comfortable with. If you were pulling HP5 Plus down to 50 or maybe even 25 ISO and you put an orange or yellow filter on it, that might help correct some of the muddiness that pulling yields. The other thing you could do is, if you want to make your skies slightly more dramatic, like I did a number of times, is put a gradient filter on the front of your lens. A gradient filter basically rotates to allow you to move it over different parts of the image, and it's clear on one side and then a color on the other. So if you have an orange gradient filter and the orange part is over the sky, you're going to give your skies more drama. And gradient filters can be used to great effect with HP5 Plus. But if you don't have filters, that's fine. HP5 Plus has great tones and great contrast at box speed with no filters. The vast majority of the images in this video, I'd say there were 247 images that were in the folder for this video, and of those, I'm going to say around 10 or 12 were taken with some type of filtering, whether that be a gradient filter or an ND filter or something like that. Most of the colored filters that you could get will simply increase contrast, especially the warm tone ones, that will also come at the cost of this film's really great tonal range. Macro filters, circular polarizers, and ND filters could be used to great effect with this film, however. For my personally preferred format, 4x5 was the format that changed my mind about HP5 Plus. I was literally counting the days until I could finish this video, until I shot it in sheet format. Then I began to see why people love HP5 Plus, and looking at some of my 6x6 and 6x7 images, I can say that I agree. Now looking back at my 35mm, I can say I really like HP5 Plus in a format agnostic way. I loved the results I got from every format when it was handled properly. If you use a good developer combination and embrace the slightly higher grain that comes in 35mm as compared to 120 in sheet formats, then 35mm can be used to great advantage with HP5 Plus with the right image aesthetic. With HP5 Plus, I tried 23 different developer dilution ISO combinations. I also tried 19 different developer dilution combinations within that 23. Of those, 3 combinations for developer and concentration stood out as particularly good, and 4 as particularly poor. The rest of the combinations, including all of the typical D76 combinations, were middle of the road, nothing to write home about. My personal favorite developers were X+3, hands down. Amazing results, definitely the best developer I used with HP5 Plus. If you've never used X+3 with HP5 Plus, I strongly recommend it, and having it be your go-to. If you love X+3, it pairs beautifully with HP5 Plus. Second favorite was Silvermax Developer at a concentration of +19, and tied with that was Ilfosol3 at a concentration of +14. Silvermax Developer is a good choice if you develop in smaller batches or need a smaller bottle. Ilfosol has a very short shelf life when opened, and like sea monkeys, it's just going to die without warning. As a general rule, Ilfosol3 is one of my least favorite developers, but I gotta say, with HP5 Plus at a concentration of +14, it really delivered beautiful results. Lastly, Rodinal at a concentration of +100 for stand developing produced all of my favorite images in this video. I never tried that with 35mm, only medium format and 4x5, so I can't speak to whether or not the results for Rodinal +100 stand developing with 35mm would be worthwhile. The 4 developers I would never for any reason use again with HP5 Plus start with Rodinal +50. This concentration produced images with excessive grain, no shadow detail, and an overall image aesthetic that I think is best termed yucky. A close second worst would be the stock concentration of LegacyPro Mic-X. It really underwhelmed me with HP5 Plus, and it's not well suited for it. Mic-X performed generally well at a +3 dilution, but there are definitely better choices than either of those concentrations with Mic-X when using HP5 Plus. Like, I don't know, any of the 3 that I named a moment ago. Another really bad choice is Adotech 4, which isn't meant for this stock and shouldn't be used for it. I would hard pass on buying Adotech 4 for HP5 Plus again. Rounding out the list of the 4 unusable developers I found with HP5 Plus was Ultrafin Plus. It remains the developer that I've tried and most hate. That streak continues with HP5 Plus. I have yet to find a film that Ultrafin Plus at any concentration works well with. When I began taking photos for this video in 2015, my relationship with HP5 Plus was one of, why would anyone like this stock? I need to open my closing thoughts with that so that you understand what a bias HP5 Plus had to overcome for me to like it as much as I do. HP5 Plus was a stock I had no use for and no interest in. Today, I have greatly enjoyed it and have a substantial respect for the image quality, the engineering that went into the development and the production of it. I don't just appreciate HP5 Plus though. I enjoy using it. I like the images, I plan shots where I can use it. HP5 Plus earned my respect with its tonal range, and the way its image characteristic is dynamic, fluid, and changes based on the chemistry used to a great extent, but also the consistency with which it can be, the results that it gives can be repeated. HP5 Plus is one of the most consistent films I've used in that it generally performs exactly the same way over time in a given set of chemistry. This makes HP5 Plus a versatile film that can meet almost any image aesthetic if handled in a way that allows it to perform as you'd like. HP5 Plus can be grainy if you want it to be. HP5 Plus can be grain-free if you want it to be. HP5 Plus can have a nice and wide contrast profile if you want it to. HP5 Plus can be high contrast with no shadow or highlight detail, if you want it to. What you want or what you need HP5 Plus to be, it can be if you shoot it in the right format and use the right developers for it to deliver the results you're looking for. HP5 Plus is pliable, fluid, dynamic, predictable, and reliable. HP5 Plus is also one of the only films that can deliver good results if you've never touched film before, or if you've been shooting film since the Eisenhower Administration. If you wanted one film to use for your whole life, HP5 Plus would probably be your best choice. HP5 Plus is also one of the truly universal films in that Ilford makes it in every format from 35mm up to, in essence, poster size. The ULF run that Ilford does each spring ensures that people who want to shoot off-sized or very large negatives can use HP5 Plus in their work. I picked up some at one of the ULF events, and the 4x4 images you've seen in this video were hand-spooled onto 127 reels for use in my Yashica 44LM. If you shoot myriad formats and want one film to shoot across all of them, and that will perform in the same way in every camera and every format, HP5 Plus is probably your best choice. Now, all of that said, HP5 Plus won't ever be my top go-to film. But if it's your top go-to film, that's awesome. It's a fantastic stock. I could fault no one for telling me this was their favorite film or their preferred film or, in their mind, the best film, because empirically, I can't disagree with any of that. There are good reasons for it to be considered all of those things. HP5 Plus is a fantastic stock, and it will take willful effort on your part for HP5 Plus to let you down.